GamingBolt presents 10 things about Final Fantasy XV that hardcore fans hate. Final Fantasy XV is now finally out after almost 10 years of waiting, and this game makes up for the sins of Final Fantasy XIII and its successors. The game is an instant classic, but even with everything the game does right, it still does a lot of things differently enough from the other games in the series that hardcore fans of the franchise may be ticked off. Here are 10 of those things about the game that may annoy hardcore Final Fantasy purists. Please note that this list may have spoilers. Required reading before playing the game. Final Fantasy XV is not a standalone product. In fact, to make any sense of it, you're gonna have to first watch at least Kingsglaive Final Fantasy XV, and preferably also Brotherhood Final Fantasy XV. The movie and the anime provide critical and crucial information about the game's story, narrative, background context, and lore and characters that the game just assumes you know of. In other words, the game makes very little concession for players who have never picked up other Final Fantasy XV media, and what it does is ineffective. This is a very poor storytelling tool, and for fans who by definition expect each Final Fantasy game to be standalone, since that's the entire point, it could be a pretty big problem. The story still sucks. Even if you have done all the required reading beforehand and you can follow everything that is going on in Final Fantasy XV without problems, there's no escaping the fact that the story in the game still sucks. It's nonsensical with nothing of note happening, at least not on screen. Several major developments actually happen off screen, and although the ending is almost satisfactory, it cannot make up for the train wreck that the rest of the story is. For a series as traditionally focused on storytelling as Final Fantasy, this is a major problem and not one that fans are likely to appreciate. Real-time combat. Let's get this out of the way. The combat in Final Fantasy XV is great, and it's possibly our favorite combat system in the series. We're not complaining about that. What we're saying is, there are a lot of series fans who hold the turn-based roots of the franchise dear, and they're not likely to be amused by Final Fantasy XV ditching all semblance of turn-based combat, going entirely real-time. Yes, there is a wait mode, and it's a really cool spin on the idea, but it's not the same. Old school fans of the series who want a new AAA turn-based Final Fantasy are unlikely to appreciate what Final Fantasy XV has to offer. Superfluous magic. Magic has been a major part of Final Fantasy games ever since the original, but in Final Fantasy XV, it's more trouble than it's worth. For starters, any spell thrown into the field affects anyone it touches, so friendly fire is always a big potential issue. But getting to even the point where you can use spells is exasperating. Spells are finite, and you need to equip them to characters manually. If you equip them to some other character other than Noctis, there's no way of knowing when that spell may be depleted, so you could go into a major battle expecting one of your party members to use a spell to bail you out if things get rough, and find out that they've already depleted the spell. Plus, you have to craft and create spells, and that's another layer of annoyance thrown into the mix. Using magic can be great if you work around all these problems, but the problems shouldn't exist to begin with. Summons. Another thing that's been changed around this time is summons. They're far more limited in number, use, and implementation. Summons can only be called under certain predefined conditions, so you can go for hours and hours in the game without an astral, which is the name of the summon, showing up. Given how prominent a role in previous games summons have been and how they're arguably the signature feature of Final Fantasy battles, this is a huge letdown. Flying regalia locked till the end of the game. Final Fantasy XV's implementation of the airship, another series iconic tradition, is the flying regalia. Noctis & Co.'s car literally sprouts wings and takes flight. It's actually a great implementation of the idea, but you never get to experience it until you're done with the main story in the game. This is because the regalia type F is not unlocked until after the story is completed. Why Square Enix wouldn't make it available in the main game is beyond us. Open world can dilute focus on the main quest. Final Fantasy XV is an open world game, and we love that about it. It's a gorgeously made world too, with a lot to do and so many things to see. But at some level, the sheer amount of overwhelming places open to the player at any given point can detract from the story and its urgency. Noctis and Ignis can spend days upon days just mucking around in all of Duscae without ever so much as going to meet Luna, and that's just the start of the game. As above, for fans who wanted a bit of a story focus from the game, this is probably a bummer. Linearity. At a certain point in the game, things start to get more linear and more focused on the story. This is baffling to say the least. Previous Final Fantasy games have always opened up more and more towards the end of the game. Remember when you finally got the airship in Final Fantasy X? Or when the entire world opens to you in Final Fantasy IV? Or even in the most linear Final Fantasy game ever, Final Fantasy XIII, when you finally got to Grand Pulse. But Final Fantasy XV almost plays like a reverse Final Fantasy XIII, getting more and more linear as time goes on. Now, it is true that you can technically exit back out into the open world at any time you want, but the actual story missions of the game become a series of corridors that the players just funnel down, one after the other. Changes from Final Fantasy Versus 13. Before it was called Final Fantasy 15, it was Final Fantasy Versus 13. It was meant to be a part of the same mythology as Final Fantasy 13, and meant to be a darker, more mature counterpart to it. The game, being a spin-off, afforded it the status to do things that would never work in a mainline Final Fantasy game, including risks it was willing to take with its storytelling. Fans, even back when the game was announced, were very hyped for Versus 13, but the game never emerged. We did get Final Fantasy 15, which is technically born from the ashes of Versus 13, but a lot has changed. In fact, almost everything except for the basic premise changed, with a lot of things toned down in an attempt to make this as widely appealing as possible. What with this game being a mainline title and also being the game that a beleaguered Square Enix pinned all their hopes on. Final Fantasy 15 is a great game in its own right, but for many fans, the what might have been of Versus 13 will always be a wistful tale of unfulfilled allure. Changes from the franchise in general. But this list doesn't even begin to touch upon all the ways that Final Fantasy 15 changes from the rest of the series. A lot has changed this time around, from gameplay to premise to even basic things like leveling up. And while Final Fantasy has always been a series that dares to change with each installment, and while most of the changes in Final Fantasy 15 are for the better, simply the fact that these changes exist is likely to piss off a lot of fans of the franchise who just want a modernization of Final Fantasy VII. Well, they'll be getting the Final Fantasy VII remake eventually. For the rest of us, we can enjoy Final Fantasy 15, which in spite of all issues, is a great game.
And that wraps it up. What are your thoughts about this? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and share it on Twitter and Facebook. And why not consider subscribing? We upload some really cool videos almost every day. Thank you for watching this video, and happy gaming!